Okay, so this post is the post for in what ways does your media product use, develop or challenge forms and conventions of real media products? Okay, so I'm going to start off with the opening of the jingle. And the opening of our news bulletin, the bulletin I helped create, is very similar to sort of a regular news bulletin, and particularly one by Oldham Community Radio. It's introduced by a jingle, which most news shows are introduced by, and the jingle was included because it allows sort of familiarity and a representation of that radio show. So when the audience hear it, they know what's being played, what part of the show it is, and they know it's news. It's a form of representation, really, showing that the news show is related to that jingle. And I think that the jingle we included really was sort of a bit too cheery when the news being included was quite formal. It sounds a little too childish, and because the target audience for our radio show is mainly teenagers and sort of an older generation, I think the tune for the jingle could be changed to make the overall product a bit better. The vocals, however, match the regular news bulletin perfectly, as the vocals over it is Oldham Community Radio 99.7 FM News Bulletin, and on the actual Oldham Community Radio news bulletins they do have a man vocalising the station's name and number. The scripting, that was very similar to OCR as well, because it follows the same conventions as other news stories, and this was done basically because me and my group wanted to make the news story similar to a professional news story such as ITV News or BBC News, and that's why I included more complex language into the scripts. It makes the language more formal. This is because formality is probably the most important part of news, and in addition all the news stories too included the main details for the story. In all the stories we included the 5 W's, including who, what, where, why, when, how. How's not really the other 5 W, but it's often included. And this was included into the scripting, particularly for the hard news story, because that's mostly sort of what was needed. So of course, the who was an old woman, the what was killed by a tram accident, where in Failsworth, how was who, what, where, why was accidentally, sorry, when it was at the time that we announced it, and why was because of the new tram accidents, or how was because of the new tram accidents. We followed this convention mainly for the rest of the news stories as well. And for the presenter, when my group and myself, we were thinking of different ideas for the presenter, how they should be, we decided that the most important quality was definitely clarity. With it being an audio radio show, it is essential that the presenter speaks clearly so that they can be understood. On a national radio station, it's not always as important because on the national radio station it's more important because if the presenter spoke with an accent, then they might not be understood, and if it's different throughout regions, then the presenter commonly speaks with its receipted pronunciation, I think it's called, and that means that the entire audience watching will be able to understand because most of the speech is clear and it's spoken fluently. In local radio shows, it's not always important because obviously with it being local, the audience will have the same accent and most probably will be able to understand. However, with the news there is still some importance that needs to be included with clarity, and that's why we mostly wanted our presenters to speak clearly, and they included more complex vocabulary in the dialogue. The only change that I would make is the presenter spoke too unconfident. She was quite quiet, and a news reporter shouldn't be so. I think the presenter should speak confidently and speak well and deliver the news with more of a strong attitude. If the presenter's parts could be re-recorded, I would suggest this change, but it's okay as it is. Okay, for the actual hard news story, we followed the general structure that a hard news story should be written in. We made sure that it had all the details needed and that it affected the audience. Just as OCR receives its news from Sky News because it can't fund for its own news finding, we too couldn't gather the news story ourselves. We didn't have a team to go out and collect the news, so we found the articles online. And for the hard news story, I actually found the article on BBC News website. It's been covered before on the actual main blog, and I believe that it affected the audience mainly because there's been new tram lines built in and around Oldham, and mostly the people listening to this on Oldham Community Radio will most probably get the trams, and it means that the audience will relate a lot more to the story and create a larger listening group. The old woman that was actually hit by a tram relates to all the people in the older generation, as this may lead them to believe that the tram lines are not safe, or that's before they listen to the full story. After they listen to it, they might believe that the trams are safe and be more inclined to actually trust the tram lines. Younger generations will most probably be using the tram lines as well, either to go to various destinations for work or travel. I myself go to Manchester on the trams, it's cheap, and I quite like the trams, they're quite nice, so I think that's why it relates to the younger generation as well. And as well, keeping with the similarity of Oldham Community Radio, the pace of the bulletin was really important. It's quite fast how we do it because we had a 5-minute time limit, and this sort of didn't affect too much, but the presenter did speak quite fluently. Sorry, 1 minute. So, because it's a 5-minute time limit, this meant that we had to deliver the news as fast as we could because we had quite a lot of news and quite a short time limit. And because of the amount of news that was originally included in the task, when we recorded all the interviews, all the recorded presenter, when we placed it into the audition suite, it came to around 15 minutes, and obviously that's far too long. So, we had to listen to it, and a lot of it was quite irrelevant and it wasn't needed, so we removed it. Once all the unneeded parts were deleted, it came down dramatically to about 6 minutes. And then I myself, as well, to mainly affect the fluentness and the clarity, removed hesitations like and once all that was removed, it was quite fluent and it helped to improve it, and it also decreased the time to our time limit. Just as most other news stories as well, the standard convention was followed, especially using hard news story first, the soft news story afterwards, and then they always finish up on an off-the-wall or a sports story. And obviously this is what we did. We only had time to cover 3 stories because we didn't have long, and a lot of news stations will do this, but several will have more than one of each. They'll follow the same convention such as hard, soft, off-the-wall, but with a longer time limit, they might include more of each story. Each story that was covered was sort of brief, and it also followed the standard structure for most news stories, such as the 5 Ws and the who, what, where, why, when, and the way they're arranged. Okay, as both OCR does and most other local radio news shows, they include different features into the stories, and we did too. This means such as like interviews, vox pops. So the standard structure was followed again with a hard, soft, off the wall for all 3 stories, and in the hard news story the main focus was upon the interview with Neil Harrison. And this covered the bulk of the story because all the information came from that actual story as well. This was introduced first, it was the presenter, and then the interview took place. This was done to give the audience an inside knowledge of how the safety works with the trams. And with the soft news story we also included an interview, and that was the bulk of the news. And this was done with a manager at a local Tesco store. It was done to deliver sort of an inside perspective of the Tesco itself, and it sort of gave more of the views of Tesco. Whereas the Off the Wall story was pretty different. It was done with vox pops, there wasn't really an interview. And it was sort of set into 2 parts, the actual news story. It started off with discussing the changes that Oldham College was making, whereas the other news stories were just introduced. And then the vox pops covered the voice of the students themselves, giving an indication of what their views were, and how their views and how it will affect their education. And this was included as it relates to the younger generation in Oldham. Obviously our target audience was different audiences, which was both young and old, and this fit in perfectly for the young generation and for the students in Oldham. So it was perfect, basically. Overall, I think the finished piece was pretty good, and it was very similar to as an OCR radio show would have been created. All of the recordings that were in there with equal quality of an OCR actually would be, because we use professional recording equipment. From the very beginning of the recording process, we knew that we had to focus on the clarity and the quality of the overall clip, and that's why we use professional equipment. And therefore the jingle that was included as well was a good quality. Again, I've said about the actual jingle being a bit childish, etc. But the quality was perfect to match the actual quality we needed. The sound bed underneath didn't sound similar to how we wanted it. We originally planned for sort of a bit of a cowbell, just that was just an example. But it was quite difficult to find using copyright-free sound beds, because obviously legalities and everything, we had to get a copyright-free one. I'm happy with the one we chosen. It does sound like a sound bed and it does suit perfectly, but it's not as good as I was expecting it to be. Overall, there wasn't much hesitation in the clip. Like I said, I cut them out for like fluency and clarity, and the overall sound levels were all sort of equal. When the sound was recorded, it was normalised, so all the sound was equal, and overall the sound levels were all the same level, so there wasn't any shouting, there wasn't any whispering. This was all intentionally done to keep the highest possible quality piece, and overall I think the piece was generally quite good.